She had been silent for so long that most people forgot she even existed. Through the lawsuits, through the headlines. Through every devastating documentary that shook the world, Debbie Rowe said nothing. She just disappeared. And the world let her, but something shifted. Something inside this woman, who had once stood at the center of the greatest celebrity story on earth, finally broke open. At 66 years old, weathered by grief and cancer and years of public humiliation, she sat down in front of a camera, took a slow breath, and started talking. And what she said stopped people cold. Because everything the world thought it knew about Debbie Rowe, about her marriage to Michael Jackson, about those children, about the deal that was supposedly made, it was wrong. Almost all of it. She wasn't the villain the tabloids created. She wasn't cold. She wasn't calculated. She was something far more human than any headline ever allowed her to be. But to understand what she revealed, you first have to understand how deeply the lies had taken root. This is the story the world was never told, until now. Debbie Rowe was never supposed to be famous. She wasn't an actress. She wasn't chasing a spotlight. She was a medical assistant, practical, plain-spoken, the kind of woman who shows up early and works quietly and doesn't need anyone to notice. She worked at the dermatology office of Dr. Arnold Klein in Beverly Hills. And it was there, not at a party, not at a concert, not at some glittering Hollywood event, that she first met Michael Jackson. He was just a patient. Guarded, private, exhausted beneath all that fame. And she treated him like a human being, nothing more, nothing less. That was rare for Michael, rarer than most people understand. Over years of appointments, something grew between them, a real friendship, the kind built on honesty, not performance. Michael Jackson, the man surrounded by millions of screaming fans every night of his life, was one of the loneliest people on earth. And Debbie saw that. She didn't flinch from it, she just stayed. By the mid-1990s, his world was already in ruins. The 1993 child abuse allegations had carved something out of him. His reputation was scarred. His trust in the people around him had collapsed. And in private, his health was deteriorating in ways the public never fully saw. That was the man Debbie Rowe loved, not the king of pop, the broken, frightened, deeply human man beneath the mask. In 1996, she told him she was pregnant, and rather than running from the complexity, she leaned into it completely. She wanted to give him something she genuinely believed he needed: a family. A reason? They married quietly in November 1996 in Sydney, Australia. The world raised its eyebrows immediately. Who was this woman? Why her? The tabloids had their answer ready within days. Business arrangement, a contract, a transaction dressed up as a marriage, but Debbie would spend years trying to explain that the truth was so much more than that. Nobody was listening. And what came next only made everything worse. When their son Prince was born and then their daughter Paris, the public fascination only deepened, and so did the suspicion. Debbie wasn't living at Neverland full-time. She wasn't photographed holding Michael's hand at galas. She wasn't playing the role the world expected from a famous man's wife. And when the marriage ended in 1999, she signed away custody of both children. That single decision would haunt her for the rest of her life. The court of public opinion was merciless. What kind of mother does that? What kind of woman looks at her own children and walks away? The commentary was vicious, it was relentless, and it attached itself to her name like a brand. But here's what nobody stopped to ask. Why? What was really happening inside that arrangement? What pressures existed that the cameras never captured? What did Debbie actually believe she was doing for those children in that moment? Because from where she was standing, the story looked entirely different. She has since described a situation far more complex than anything reported. A woman trying to navigate impossible circumstances without a roadmap. A woman who believed, truly believed, that stepping back was the right thing for Prince and Paris, not the cruel thing. But the world had already made up its mind. And what came next would make everything even harder to untangle. The years after the divorce stripped away whatever was left of Debbie Rowe's public image. In 2003, journalist Martin Bashir released his documentary Living with Michael Jackson. Debbie appeared briefly, in a clip edited so tightly, so carefully, that it suggested her entire pregnancy had been nothing more than a transaction. Context removed, nuance erased. The damage was instant. She tried to push back, she gave interviews. She said the footage was manipulated. But in a world moving faster than truth could travel, her voice simply disappeared beneath the noise. And that's when things took a shocking turn. Later that year, Michael was arrested on child molestation charges. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything the world had seen. And once again, Debbie's name was pulled into the current custody hearings. Court proceedings. Her children's futures debated publicly like they were storylines in a TV drama. Through all of it, she said almost nothing. People read that silence as guilt, as confirmation, as proof that she was exactly the cold, transactional figure they had already decided she was. But the truth behind her silence was far more surprising. She was terrified, not of Michael, but of the circus surrounding him. She made a deliberate, agonizing choice to stay out of the center of that chaos, because she believed with everything she had that stepping into it would only destroy her children further. Was she right? Was she wrong? She has wrestled with that question herself, but the answer she arrived at would come years later, and it would shake the people who heard it. June 25, 2009. Michael Jackson died, and in an instant every wall Debbie Rowe had built around herself, every careful distance she had maintained, collapsed. She was the mother of his children. And those children, teenagers now without their father, were suddenly at the center of a very public, very ugly battle over who would raise them. Courts, cameras, Katherine Jackson, the estate. All of it playing out in real time on television screens around the world. And for the first time in years, Debbie stepped forward, the woman the world had called absent, cold, finished. She walked back into the fire for her children. What happened in those years was private and painful in ways that only those closest to it truly understand. Paris Jackson, now a young woman who has spoken with extraordinary honesty about her life, has described the aftermath of her father's death as the darkest period she has ever survived. Depression. Self-harm, a crisis of identity that nearly broke her. And in talking about those years, she has also talked about her mother. Not with bitterness, not with anger, with something far more complicated. Something that sounded, underneath all its complexity, like love. Because Debbie Rowe had never fully disappeared from her children's lives. She was there in phone calls, in private visits, in moments the cameras never reached. The story the public had been told about her was not the full story. It never had been. And then came the moment nobody expected, when Debbie finally decided to say out loud what she had only ever whispered in private. When Debbie Rowe broke her silence in a series of extended, unguarded interviews, the internet split directly down the middle because she defended him, not recklessly, not without hesitation, but firmly, with the steady clarity of someone who had known the man behind the myth for nearly 30 years. She said Michael Jackson was one of the most generous, most loving, most deeply wounded people she had ever met in her life. She talked about his terror of being alone, a real, consuming fear that never left him, his desperate need to be a better father than he had experienced, his almost unbearable need to be loved for something other than what he could perform. She sat there in silence for a moment before one answer, as if deciding how much of herself to give. And then she gave it all. She said the media, the machine that had chewed through Michael Jackson for 4 decades, had turned repetition into fact. That she had watched the person she cared for most be slowly, methodically dismantled in public, while the people who could have helped him looked away. The debate that followed was immediate and fierce. Was she protecting a legacy she had a personal stake in? Was she speaking genuine truth? Or was it somewhere far messier than either of those clean answers? But then she said one more thing, one thing that nobody had ever heard her say before. She said the arrangement, the marriage, the children, the custody was never about money for her, that she had made those choices because she loved him, not romantically by the end, but in the deep, aching way you love someone you have watched suffer and tried, in every way you knew how, to protect. And then she spoke about his final years. About what she believes really happened to him, about the people around him, about the loneliness that swallowed him whole at the end. And the answer was not what anyone in that room expected. Today, Debbie Rowe lives quietly on a horse property in California. She breeds horses. She avoids the noise as best she can. She is 66 years old and she has survived things that would have ended most people. Cancer, grief, decades of public shame built on stories that were never fully true. Paris Jackson, grown now, has spoken about her mother in ways that directly contradict every villain the tabloids ever invented. There is warmth there. There is complexity. There is a relationship still being built, quietly, away from cameras. And whether you believe everything Debbie said about Michael Jackson, whether her defense of him reads as truth or as loyalty to a ghost, one thing is genuinely impossible to deny. Her story was never the one the headlines told. It was messier, more human, far more heartbreaking than anything a tabloid had the patience to capture. Sometimes the person the world judges the most harshly is simply the one who was too tired to keep fighting the narrative, until finally they weren't. So I want to know what you think. Does Debbie Rowe's side of the story change how you see her? Do you believe she was protecting Michael Jackson out of genuine love, or do you think there's still more we're not being told? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to hear where you land on this. And if you want more real stories, untold stories, about the biggest names in Hollywood, the ones that go deeper than any headline hit, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning.